if you're popping on right now, I am going to put myself under the microscope, right? This is a test for me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in to ChatGPT 15 challenging questions for a professional astrologer, right? Then I'm going to see if I can answer these questions. I'm going to see where it goes for me. And I've got no idea what sort of questions it'll ask me. So I think that'll be quite exciting. And I'm going to have a look at that. So yeah, I think I'll just wait a few more minutes to see when everyone's popping on. By the way, it's new moon day today, new moon in Cancer, conjunct Jupiter. I've done quite a few videos on that if you want to have a look at how it affects your star sign, because it's quite a positive one. It's a little bit of a boost. I think we all need it because the energy so far has been very heavy, even internationally in the arena. We've had all these geopolitical events going on, and it's all been very, very, confusing and that, well, who can make head or tail of it? So I think this will be a nice little reboot, an excuse for all of us to have a little bit of me time, blow off steam, and have a little bit of fun. Because Jupiter is about fun. They say that whether you are marketing a product or even in your life where you want to motivate to do something, you have to make it a bit of fun. So even whether you're doing a diet or, even if you've got I suppose it would be kind of difficult to make your tax return fun, isn't that so? That you have a big glass of something, a little bevy to go along with it. But then again, that might confuse the issue a little bit more. So I'm not sure if that can be made fun. But, you can try and make things in life a little bit more appealing and fun, a fun factor. And it is motivating, and it motivates other people. Even if you're a teacher, you're trying to motivate your classroom to do something, try and make it fun. Trying to motivate kids to clean their room, try and think of a way to make it a little bit fun. Make them do a TikTok video of something, cleaning their room, and they can upload it to their friends and they can say, my mother's such a bitch, look what she made me do. Could be fun. Okay. Hi guys. Right, so I have no idea how many people are watching, but I think it's time to get going. So I'm going to now put into ChatGPT the question, right, and that is, I'm looking for 15 challenging questions for an astrologer. ChatGPT are going to test me, going to see how I'm going to do here. Right, let's see what the first one is. First question is, how do you reconcile conflicting indicators in a natal chart? For example, a strong Saturn placement in the 10th house suggesting career discipline, but a debilitated Mars in the 6th house indicating a low drive or health challenges. Which takes priority? I actually don't see that as much of a conflict because Saturn is about overcoming difficulty. So you could certainly use your debilitated Mars, which is going to teach you early lessons about valuing health and discipline in order to keep good health, to turn that into discipline into pursuing a career. And maybe when you've had an early health battle, it makes you more resilient and determined to be successful in your life, or to use that to become a doctor, because Saturn can be a doctor. Mars in the 6th is surgeon. So maybe that'll lead to a career in medicine. I don't see that as a conflict, but you would have to look at how strong the Saturn was. Is the Saturn in Capricorn? Because then it's amplified. Is it in Cancer? The Mars in the 6th house may be ameliorated by a trine to Jupiter, which helps it out a little bit. The Mars in the 6th may be in a sign where Mars is very compatible. Maybe it's in Capricorn, indicating that Mars gives you the strength to overcome these. So I don't think that's necessarily a big conflict, but we must always balance the chart by finding which planets are more powerful. Is a planet key in an aspect pattern? Is a planet in its own sign? Is a planet exalted? Because then it's more powerful. And does a planet have debilitating aspects? Now, if Mars in the 6th is afflicted by Neptune, now that's a big problem that would actually make achieving the Saturn in the 10th a lot harder and would make a person more prone to being abused by authority figures or difficulty fitting in the workplace. Okay, how do you approach transits from outer planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto to natal planets when interpreting long-term life changes? Can you give an example from a past client? Well, Pluto is very powerful and transformative. For example, a client I have recently has been struggling for nearly 40 years to get into a good relationship. And as Pluto aspected her Venus and her moon everything has clicked. She's found her soulmate. She's incredibly connected. This relationship is everything she has wanted, and she's been very eager to have a child of her own. But through this relationship, she's having interaction with her guy's child, and it's working out brilliantly. She loves the son. So the son, as in, his son, and it's working out so well. So Pluto is very, very transformative, and Pluto and Uranus really create real life effects that are quite dramatic, that people can latch on to, take advantage of, but they can be very challenging for people who are less self-honest and resistant to change. With Neptune, I find it dissolves, and the effects are far more on a spiritual basis, which can be hard to explain to more pragmatic, ambitious people. So Neptune is much more about the emotional and spiritual side of life and evolving in a personal growth way, so you would interpret it a lot differently. Pluto is also very much about psychological issues and our psychological makeup, and the issues it recreates in our life challenge our psychology and inspire a reawakening. Jupiter can be a lot more chaotic and unpredictable, but within that unpredictableness we break out of ruts. Okay, in horary astrology, do you handle a chart that is stricture against judgment, and do you still interpret it? Why not? No, I'm not answering that question. I don't do a lot of horary. It's not my favorite branch, and so I'm going to have a pass on that question, okay? Question number 4. Right. How do you distinguish between a Pluto transit activating psychological transformation versus actual loss and crisis? Where is the line between metaphor and event? Well, Pluto, when it's connected to Saturn, or when you're also having a strong Saturn transit, can indicate a financial loss and a loss in the material world, and it can also mean a loss that is going to affect you in that kind of way. So you could interpret that loss more in terms of material things. Pluto, when it's squaring Mercury, can mean problems with contracts and things, but Pluto squaring Mercury can also mean psychological change, evolution, so it's more of a metaphorical shift. If Neptune is very active at the same time to the moon, that could be more of a loss in terms of grief, right? And if Jupiter is transiting the 8th, of course, could be an inheritance, so you could interpret it that way, but you usually wouldn't really want to go in that direction with a client unless they'd particularly asked. So Pluto, if it's affecting Jupiter, is usually more of an opportunity and a moving home. So it could be loss of your place of birth. Pluto affecting the first planet could mean loss of identity. So you go through an identity crisis or have a loss in that way. Pluto affecting Venus, Moon, or planets ruling your 7th could be more a dramatic shift where a relationship totally breaks down and you feel that sort of loss, right? So that can be a tangible thing. Okay, next question. When a natal chart shows no planets in angular houses, how does that affect the chart's vitality or the native's ability to make an impact? Okay, angular houses are linked with cardinal signs, so they're more proactive, mean a person takes more initiative, can be a lot busier and that sort of thing. But it doesn't matter if you don't have planets in angular houses or if you don't have personal planets, because you still could have a lot of planets in cardinal. You still could have Mars as a predominant placement. You still could have Mars placed in Aries or Capricorn, which would be very strong initiative. You still could have Mars as part of a T-square. You might have Mars square Pluto, which is incredibly assertive. You may have a rising sign like Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, which is dynamic and assertive. So having no planets in angular houses is no real big deal, because you can replicate that through strong Mars, strong Jupiter placements, lots of cardinal signs, lots of fire signs. So not so worried. By the way, guys, if you're wondering what we're doing, I put into ChatGTP 15 challenging questions for a professional astrologer, and I'm seeing how I do on these questions. So we've reached that was question 5, actually. It now says interpretive and ethical challenges, okay? How do you deal with charts that suggest addiction, abuse, or self-destructive tendencies? What ethical boundaries do you place on what you tell a client? Well, a client, you can see that. I mean, I had it with a client today, Sun conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius, Moon in Pisces. These are signs that often indicate a person has a problem with addiction or low impulse control. So if you were seeing moon afflicted by Neptune, Neptune rising, Sagittarius placements can come into the mix along with Gemini, and also Saturn square Neptune, which is either one of those on an angle. Okay, then you're going to feel that the client has a problem. So usually a client will mention to you they might be struggling with sort of depression, or they have no kind of focus in life, they feel very lost, and then you can gently question them what steps they have taken to address these issues and what are their current biggest challenges. And they will usually open up and mention that they have a few addictions. Because you can also broach, have you tried counseling? Have you been in that counseling environment? Have you had a problem with controlling impulses and falling into negative cycles and patterns that repeat? Usually when you address those questions, people know that you understand that their personality is perhaps a little bit vulnerable and they're having a problem dealing with emotional issues, so that they're having to suppress or distract themselves, right? And if you've introduced that, they can often ask you more and tell you more. But you wouldn't want to say, oh, well, are you a junkie? I mean, okay. But very often it's the partners of people like this that are coming to me. And then you can immediately say to your partner, to this person, has your partner had a few addiction issues? And then the answer is invariably yes. I mean, in one case, it was no. He didn't actually have addiction issues, but he was wild. He was like a kind of a rock star lifestyle, and he had an insatiable desire for fun, excitement, change, womanizing. So it wasn't so much the drugs, but he was kind of more addicted to the wild side of life. Okay. If a client asks you about death or serious illness based on a transit, how do you address this without causing fear or overstepping? Now, this is incredibly difficult. Most people are neurotic. Most people are very worried about their health, especially after a certain age. When you're young, you think you'll live forever, but then you go over that threshold and you're always worried about your health. I would see transits Neptune to Saturn, particularly if Saturn influences the house of health, difficult transits to Moon, Sun in the first house. But you usually need a lot of negative transits to cause major health issues, right? And you wouldn't want to worry someone about it if they didn't have multiple transits, but you would encourage them to maybe address diet first of all and lifestyle issues, and think more holistically about stress, because most people's problems are stress and diet related, or a toxic relationship that's impacting health. So you can approach it from that. And then from there, you can ask if they've had contact with a medical health practitioner, and you can encourage them to perhaps go in that direction alongside a holistic approach where they also thinking about psychological triggers of illness. As an astrologer, you're mainly looking at the psychological environmental triggers as well. But there's certain signs, particularly Cancer rising, people who have Moon in Cancer, Taurus rising, can also be problems with a unhealthy relationship to food and bad gut health. And then you can point people to see your doctor, but definitely think about researching more about gut health. And then I would try and encourage them to some supportive channels on health and wellness. But obviously you always have to encourage people to get professional advice, and don't, as an astrologer, overstep that, because you're not a doctor. You haven't diagnosed this person, and you want to give them a lot of positivity going forward, that they have the power to make changes and overcome this. So the main thing is you can say, yes, Pluto's affecting you, but this is giving you a lot of power to conquer a negative eating habit that can revolutionize your life. So you need to make sure there's light at the end of that tunnel, but you steer them along a, professional route. Do you believe the birth chart is more about fate or free will? Can you give an example where someone's choices clearly overrode difficult natal placements? The chart is always all about free will, right? And some people, however, are very fatalistic. Now, I've always said in my readings, Aries are one of the people who astrology works best for, because they take the bull by the horns, they make changes, they keep pushing. So I think the more people are positive and proactive, the more that they can use the negatives in their chart to grow from that and use those obstacles to succeed. But when people are very passive, things really have to get terribly bad. In other words, they become a victim of fate before they'll actually do something. So you need tolerance and attitude. So your attitude to fate and free will is actually the precursor. But the big thing is, people with the most difficult charts tend to have more successful lives. People with very easy charts often are too complacent, too lazy, and don't make the most of things. So sometimes when people have had it too easy, indicated by some easy aspects, they don't fully tap into potential. So bad natal placements are actually a positive. How do you validate astrological predictions without confirmation bias or leading the client? What objective metrics do you use? I always look for backup. So I see what's happening in the transits, then I look at the progressions, and I look at the solar arcs, and I usually need confirmation that different aspects are showing up the same thing. And you always have to look, when you see transits, you can have a wonderful transit, but does the natal chart suggest this potential? So you're cross-referencing yourself, and you're always questioning yourself as well, because you know that the client could be leading you to what they want to say. You could be leading them. So I always look for other verification, and I make sure that I ask the client questions to just check that we are on the right basis. But yes, always make sure you keep an open mind. And when I've done a reading, I review it afterwards just to see that I hadn't get caught up in the moment. But very often in the heat of the moment, doing a reading on live and very quickly, you tend to get the right answer the first time. And if you go back and overthink, that's when the confirmation bias sets in. So go with your first instincts as an astrologer. You're usually going to get it right. Overthinking leads to the wrong decision. How do you explain astrology's validity to skeptics or scientists in a way that doesn't rely on belief? Well, first of all, I'm not an astrology evangelist. I don't push it on anyone. There are enough people that believe in it and love it, and I don't want to push it on people who don't. I find there are very few skeptics. Professional people, all sorts of people have been extremely open-minded, and a lot of religious people also believe in it because it's in their religious books. And that I say as well, astrology has been around since time immemorial, right? It's one of the earliest ways that the ancient people used to predict their life. And astrology is a science because it's based on anecdotal evidence. It's based on observation, record keeping, creating hypotheses and testing hypotheses. And, back in the day, before, our ancestors were primitive people, they looked at the sky all the time, and they had to judge the seasons to know when to plant. They had to try and predict weather. They learned to interpret things going on by looking at the sky, and they started amassing a body of evidence where they saw a correlation between what's happening there and down here. This grew into astrology. It's been around a very long time. So people have been using it and fine-tuning it for a very long time. What are the major differences in interpreting a chart in traditional Hellenistic astrology versus modern psychological astrology? When would you choose one or the other? I use the modern one, and I don't have a good answer to that. I haven't put a lot of thought into the two things there. How do you integrate techniques from different systems, Vedic dasha with Western transits without compromising? I think you have to find what works with you and stick to it. My big rule with astrology is too many cooks spoil the broth. It's too easy to get totally sidetracked in asteroids, fixed stars, Sabian symbols, and you can distract and confuse yourself. So learn what works for you, stick to your protocols, and don't distract yourself by getting involved in numerous different techniques, because it's going to cause clutter and it's really going to confuse everything. How do you interpret a chart using whole sign houses compared to Placidus, especially when a planet changes house between systems? Okay, I would use Placidus for people who are born in most of the world, but equal house system is essential for those born in very far northern hemisphere places: northern Russia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Scotland, northern Canada. Use equal house because you're going to get a very distorted looking chart. Also, if you're born very far south of Argentina or Falklands, would be the same. Most of the southern hemisphere is not very far from the equator comparatively, right? So the further north you are, the more you might want to use equal house. Even though I'm born in the southern hemisphere in Johannesburg, I prefer equal house because it always worked for my chart. If in doubt, I would use equal house. I find it reliable. But always remember, a planet in the last few degrees of a house will really affect the next house. So if a planet is very near the end of, say, the fourth, the fifth, whatever it is, interpret it as if it's going into the next house. Do you believe the birth chart reflects karma or soul contact? If so, how do you see it in the chart? If not, how do you interpret the purpose of life? This would be very much about the nodes, the north node versus the south node. The south node representing the karma we bring in from a previous life, the talents and challenges we overcome in a previous life, which can be a good basis for success in this, but also comfort zones we need to move out of. The north node by sign, and more importantly, house, because everyone in your school class would have had it in the same sign. So it's not as important. So you'd have to interpret north node in terms of sign, house, where the ruler is. So if your north node is in Aquarius, where is Uranus in your chart? What aspects does Uranus make? And then you can interpret it. When Uranus is connected to your north node, often indicates trauma, or your south node, that can indicate a lot of trauma. Also, if the south node is connected to the 11th house, which is connected to Aquarius, also can indicate trauma. in the past, but there's a whole body of work on the North Node that gives you an enormous information on where you came to, where you're heading for, what your past karma is, how you convert that karma to positivity, the things you need to focus on in the areas of life and talents you need to work on in this life to make sure that you are successful, full your purpose, and understand your fate. You can also use the 12th house and the rulers of the 12th house to understand past life experiences, karma, and blockages that need to be brought in and resolved in this house. Planets, obviously, in the 12th house, very important. What is the role of intuition in astrology? Can an astrology be technically correct in a reading but still miss the truth of a client's experience? Yeah, I'd say this is where your experience as an astrologer comes in. When you're starting out, you're very technical, you can easily become distracted and confused, and it's only through dealing with people on a continual basis that the intuition kicks in. Astrology can awaken latent psychic and intuitive talents, so you just keep working and work through it. Obviously, you always want to look to the technicals to create clarity and to avoid bias, but intuition works very powerfully and combined. So you need to have a balance between your technical parameters, which you don't want to move away from, but what your intuition is telling you, because very often your intuition adds a new layer of awareness and understanding, and through communication with a client, these intuitive feelings tend to come through, and you can have quite amazing insights, particularly during a reading. It's often better to The intuition is often better as you see a chart cold. As I say, over-analysis, and the more you look at it, the more you can be confused. But often, if you can jot down your first insights as you look at a chart cold, you're going to get a lot of good intuition coming through. Okay, I hope you liked the quiz and the Q&A. Those questions were interesting and quite deep, actually. And I don't know, maybe they weren't so interesting for the novice who doesn't understand much about astrology, but they were challenge for me, actually, and I enjoyed answering them. Okay, take care, everybody, and keep checking out the channel, and do subscribe. Obviously, subscriber benefits are I'll do a live on whatever you want. I will chat to you about your chart or send you a picture of your chart. Obviously, if I've got a lot of requests, I'm not going to chat extensively with everyone all the time about their chart, but we can always offer discounts on readings. Thanks, guys. Hope you all take care. Bye.